The process we're about to go through does make some unhealthy dust, so it's a good idea to wear a respirator. Any pieces that are thicker than 1 inch in any spot should be broken down. You can put thick pieces in a different container and break them up with a hammer. Next, we submerge all of the bone dry clay with water, and this starts to break down all of the clay. Just a few minutes later, the clay is already starting to break down, but there's still some big chunks. After about 20 minutes, there's only a few chunks left, and those will soften up in the next part of the process.
So the clay is softened to a slip-like consistency, and we're going to take a plaster bat, it's a big block made of plaster, and we're going to lay it across this plaster so it can dry out slowly.
I scoop the clay onto the plaster bats by hand instead of pouring it out of the bucket. It gives me more control and allows me to make an even layer of slip. Poking holes will increase the surface area of the slip, allowing it to dry faster on top because the plaster is drying it out below. After 20 minutes, the thin spots are already dry to the touch. They could be usable, but the middle is still much too soft to use. Now normally you would leave the clay uncovered, but I wasn't able to stick around, so I covered it in plastic and came back a day later. You can see the clay is dry in the thin spots and in the thick spots as well. Those cracks you're seeing are just from the clay shrinking and pulling away from itself. This is how it looked before it dried.
The clay is dry enough now where it's not too sticky, and so we're going to peel it off of the plaster and start to wedge it together.
Now this can be a tedious process. If that's the case, I use a plastic scraper. Just be careful not to gouge the plaster. If you do, just make sure you throw it away and don't put it back into the clay batch. And now it's time to wedge the clay. We wedge clay to remove air bubbles and to even out clay that's too soft or too hard. This is called the ram's head wedging method. Basically, you're folding the clay over itself multiple times, like you're kneading dough for making bread. Now if you look carefully, you can actually see the air bubbles being pushed out of the clay. There's one right there. There's a lot of them, but the more you wedge, the goal is to get rid of as many of those as you can. Size of the clay. Now once all the clay is wedged up, get a plastic garbage bag and you can roll up the clay for later storage. We call this the Alfred roll. It's better than just putting it in the bag because it gives you multiple layers of plastic, and plastic keeps all the moisture locked in, keeping your clay plastic and workable versus bone dry and unworkable. The clay will keep for a long time with this storage method. If it's ever too wide, pat it from the sides as you roll it. A small hole like that one there, it won't bother the clay too much because there's multiple layers of plastic keeping all the moisture locked in.
Well, there you have it. We just took clay from bone dry to plastic stage, moldable, flexible, usable. Feel free to comment or subscribe if you liked the video, and look forward to more Make Do Learn videos in the future.